Hadirin yang berbahagia, kembali lagi kita pada seminar selanjutnya. Selanjutnya kami persilakan kepada moderator kedua kita, Ibu Paradipta Agustina Shum MPD, untuk memandu seminar kita pada sesi kedua siang hari ini.
Next, we invite our second moderator, Ms. Pradipta Agustina Shum MPD.
Thank you very much for the Master of Ceremony for the invitation. Here I am. I might introduce myself. My name is Pradipta Agustina Shum MPD, and today I will be the moderator of the plenary session. We have 3 keynote presenters for today's session. The first will be Professor Alan Reed, and then the second will be Dr. David Wei Tai, PhD, FHEA, and then the last presenter would be Professor Yutaka Ukaji. For the first presenters, we have Professor Alan Reed. I would like to introduce him. Our first presenter here, Professor Alan Reed, is a professor in the Faculty of Education, Monash University. He is an affiliate of the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, a member of the Monash Climate Change Communication Research Hub, and leads the Education, Environment, and Sustainability Faculty Research Group. Professor Alan Reed is active in a range of environmental education research activities and networks, primarily in Europe, North America, and Australasia. Professor Alan Reed's research interests focus on teachers' thinking and practice in environmental education and traditions, capacities and issues in environmental education theory, research and policy. He focuses his teaching commitments and interests on environmental and sustainability education and research approaches and professional inquiry in education. He, of course, had received many awards and also some nominations, including Outstanding Contributions to Research in Environmental Education Award, North American Association for Environmental Education in 2015, and recently in 2022, he was nominated Teaching Award nominee from Monash Student Association. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Alan Reed. Hello, Professor Alan. Professor Reed, how are you?
Good, thanks. I hope you can hear me.
Okay, so today Professor Alan Reed will present his presentation under the title Environmental Education Perspectives in Maritime Education. I invite Professor Reed. We have 40 minutes for the presentation. The time is yours.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to talk with you today. I hope I say this correctly. Salamat Sore, Namaste Alan. And thank you to the ICOME team to Bang Erawan for connecting me with this conference. I'd like to thank you all for persisting with the second plenary session. And I hope what I have to say over the next 40 minutes is of interest to you. In the introduction, there's a lot more detail at the website about me, so please have a look at that QR code. If you want to know a bit more about the research group that Gillian and I are members of, along with some of our students, please have a look at that link too. And then if you find my accent or the speed of talking is tricky, I encourage you to download the slides which I've made available for today. There's a lot of information on them. I won't speak to every single point, but I hope that they can be a useful resource for the conference today. So you may notice that the thing that I have done with the title of my talk is focused on environmental education perspectives in maritime education, inserting the word education into the first two words. And what I want to try and do is link my talk to some of the sub-themes which are listed on the conference website. There are three things I want to cover in the next 35 minutes or so. The first thing is looking at what does environmental education currently focus on internationally, including things like where the consensus now is on the expected outcomes, to bring us up to date with the foundations that have built in the last 50 years through to the contemporary questions of environmental education. The second thing I want to do, and again you'll see my slides are color-coded, which models and illustrations of environmental education want to align with by the ICOME community. So I will give some examples of that, which build on the first theme. And then in the third theme, I'd like to focus on those areas which we might prioritise in research and development to embed environmental education perspectives into maritime education. So just to give you some examples of where I'm coming from, as you will find on my profile page, I do a lot of work in environmental education research. I also work with a lot of international organisations and read a lot of documents as a professor of education. And that includes things like the Education for Sustainable Development Goals and the recent UNESCO report on education. The one I'd like to highlight for today is the exemplary practices in marine science education. My colleague Geraldine Colville has been leading a lot of interesting work in that area. And again, I'd encourage you, if you are not so familiar with this work, to have a look at this groundbreaking collection, which discusses a number of different perspectives on marine science education and ocean literacy. It gives lots of perspectives on what researchers and practitioners might do to develop good practice, which kind of goes to some of the things that Gillian Kidman was reading just before the break. And it provides some examples of ideas for undergraduate and graduate courses, which I think is very appropriate for the university which is hosting this particular event. Other examples of things which are beginning to shape the international dialogue on marine environmental education and maritime education. This isn't out yet, but I just want to fly a flag for a new special issue of the Environmental Education Research Journal, which will be looking at marine environmental education and digital technologies. Particularly in the contributions to that, we will see a number of different research studies looking at the different roles, benefits, limitations and alternatives to the use of digital technologies in environmental education. And I will give some examples of that later on in the talk. So if you're interested in that, do take a look at the link. The closing date for papers ended last month, but there should be some papers emerging for that collection fairly soon. The third quick example of resources is here at Monash. I'm speaking to you from today on the night of the Bunurong people. I'm involved in a number of different teacher education programs and involved in trying to help Australian schools, for example, engage in different campaigns which support marine and maritime education initiatives. So again, reading through those and working with UNEP through the Global Environmental Education Partnership, for example, has helped me gain different perspectives on the blue economy, global ocean science and so on, how different schools, universities and education providers can develop this work. And I will be drawing on different aspects of that in the next 30 minutes. What this leads me to think about is, what is sustainable, what is resilient, and what would count as inclusive as a blue economy. And the key question for me is, where do we learn this? Do we learn this in the occasional lesson in school, through a structured curriculum, or a whole school approach, through partnerships with other bodies like those government departments?
Excuse me, Professor.
Yes.
Your voice is echoing, so it's not quite clear here. Probably the microphone, or
It might be my speaker.
oh yeah, this one is much better. Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much.
So hopefully that's fixed the sound problem. Bonnie, can you nod if that seems to be working, because I can see your face? Yes? I can't hear you. Good. Okay. Thank you. So to move on, one of the big challenges we face is we know that the UN, through its monitoring and evaluation reports on progress towards sustainable development goals, has lots of bad news stories about life below water. And again, one of the key challenges here is how do we begin to turn that around, whether it's through legislation, through regulation, but also through the kind of softer power of our education systems. So when it comes to thinking about environmental education, what I just want to emphasize here is in a recent literature review that I did with Nicole Arben from Stanford University, we summarized about 50 years worth of environmental education discussion. Again, you can see in the top right-hand corner a full volume collection, which also taps into this. But we were interested in how environmental educators aim to provide educational activities that foster meaningful learning. And that is about challenges to the flourishing of communities of life on Earth. With the oceans being 70% of the surface of the planet, it's important that we think about the role of the marine and maritime and, say, the blue economy in that. Again, as we continued in that quote, this work is nested within diverse understandings of the ways that human activities shape life on a dynamic planet. And that is to recognise that there will be different cultures and traditions which are important to this. And again, as our understanding changes, so might the potential subject matter for environmental education. It will be extensive and evolve quite considerably depending on where we are in the world, but also our cultural priorities, our economic priorities, and the pressures we face in those kinds of things. Now, in a related document, some of the members of the North American Association for Environmental Education put together this model. I just want to unpack this slightly, because what it tries to do is say that if you see the health of the environment and society as strongly interlinked, then there's a strong argument to suggest that environmental education should be seen as a cornerstone of social change. And that will help ensure that we address environmental problems and address the health of the environment. And again, in that model, you can see there are some interacting components which show that there are foundational aspects which we need to consider, but also the context and content which might inform our understanding of behaviours, but also the behaviour changes which we might need to undertake to begin to address these problems. Now, in this particular model, there are five core outcomes defined for environmental education. And I just want to quickly mention that each of the five, which is appearing on the screen in front of you, can be considered in a way which is not just land-based, but also thinks about the marine environment. And again, in the discussion at the end of the last plenary, and there was this question raised about, well, what happens if you're not close to the coast, for example? There may be other ways of beginning to address the marine through subjects in schools which study things at a distance, but also increasingly with the use of, say, virtual and immersive technologies to encourage engagement. And again, they may be making the world of education more inclusive for people as they are able to, perhaps if they're less able-bodied, for example, explore a reef to see the diversity there by just putting on an augmented reality or virtual reality headset. So there are different kinds of learning which might be possible here, which move us beyond the kind of traditional notion of doing stuff either in classrooms or out of classrooms in rural areas, for example. Now, again, within this particular model, some of the things which are emphasized here is this is not edutainment. This is not just about giving people examples of entertainment which are under the guise of education. There is a particular purpose in mind, a moral purpose for what goes on in schools. And again, in this particular model, which was built on a consensus building survey across North American and particularly what we might still call first world educators, this emphasis here on moving people to act And again, this is not just about school children, this is about adult learners, this is about communities, and thinking about collective approaches to things. So, for example, in some of Nicole Ardwin's other work, she talked about the importance of place-based education, and particularly the emphasis on focus, emphasising issues that focus our involvement, our action, and community-based conservation. So again, those are not individualised approaches, those are emphasising community, collective approaches to this. And again, we might see that most of the things which are mentioned in that slide are also linked to our conceptions of ocean literacy too. Now, if we move to some other perspectives on this, which might inform how we think about this topic, I just want to flag something from Nicholas Berberlees, who is a professor of education in the US, and he has talked a lot about the notion of immersive education. Now, I'm not suggesting here that everybody should get into the water, but in reflecting on the role of the virtual, some of the things that this professor of education is particularly interested in is saying that any classroom experience can be immersive in the sense of if it engages students, participants in what is of interest, involves them in leading to something which surpasses their previous level of learning, perhaps their ignorance or misunderstanding about things, gives them an opportunity to exercise their imagination, so it engages a different part of our kind of abilities, our learning domains, beyond, say, just simply the cognitive, but also thinking about our heart and our actions. So there might be something about imagining futures here, and also affords or offers opportunities for interaction. So again, we don't have time today to go into this in detail, but the slides are available, and I'd encourage you to read that paper if this sounds of interest to you. But what this work is getting at is what counts as a successful learning environment. Now, we can also go back 100 years and see that this debate has been going on for quite some time. And again, many of us know of the American philosopher of education, John Dewey, and he talks quite considerably about the role of schools in helping shape democracy and a better future for society. And many of those themes reappeared in the recent UNESCO's report on the futures of education. But again, what one of the key elements from his Democracy and Education paper gets at is this notion of encouraging us to engage with others who are unlike ourselves, so that we can learn about why they live the way that they do, but also perhaps challenge the way that they do because of, say, in this case, the damaging environmental effects of that. So in some senses, education has a particular role in calling society to account, calling economists to account, calling politicians to account, calling those who have any form of power to account by teaching whether it's young people or older people, how power works and functions in society in ways which might lead to an unsustainable future, which is damaging for many. So again, it takes us beyond the traditional notions of what happens in education and kind of gets us to think about how we can transform educational institutions, not just at the classroom level, but at the system level and at the macro level in terms of what the say ministries of education, or in Indonesia, the Ministry of Religious Affairs focuses on in education. So if I now move on to the second theme, I want to now try to put some of that into practice and give an example from New Zealand, which I came across through some work with the Global Environmental Education Partnership. Blake New Zealand, Blake NZ, is a provider of marine environmental education. It runs a number of different programs, and depending on who's participating in, they shift in focus. But Peter Blake, who was a famous sailor, yachtsman, explorer, adventurer, he had a particular purpose in mind, which was to use the marine environment to re-engage people with caring for the environment. Now, I'm hoping that this will load and play, but I'd like to just show you a video for a few minutes just to illustrate the kind of work which happens as marine environmental education in some parts of New Zealand. I'm assuming you can hear this as well. My soundtrack. Here in
I grew up here. The Keynote Islands at the edge of the Gulf are one of my favorite places to explore, especially below the surface. Out here at the edge of the Hauraki Gulf, the shallows are still lush with kelp, which is an important habitat for our fish. Snapper congregate, feed and breed, and the great schools of Trevally pluck krill from the surface. We catch these fish by the boatload. Half of the take is recreational, and the other half is commercial. But ultimately, we consume all of it. Every year, our debt to the Gulf has grown bigger. Today, crayfish are functionally extinct, and most of our fish declined by 80%. It affects the balance of the ecosystem. Without their natural predators, killer populations have exploded, eating their way through the remaining habitat. But not everywhere. Some areas have been set aside as marine reserves. These protected areas are rich with life and attract large migratory species from further afield too. The benefits of protected areas radiate outwards. Fish are more abundant around the reserves, and their larvae drift far beyond its borders, a process known as the halo effect. The Hauraki Gulf is more connected with our activities and more fragile than anyone could have known. Our actions on land spill into the sea, and the waste from industry and farms runs into our waterways, which all ends up in the same place. Today, our harbour is smothered with silt and riddled with invasive species. It's not too late for our Gulf, but we need a sea change now. To rebound, we need to protect those places in the Gulf where nature still runs wild. We need to fish and buy fish responsibly. Let's be the generation that turns the tide, finding the balance between what we can take and what we should leave, so that the modi of the Gulf is restored, for you, for me, and for everybody in the city by the sea.
So with that, I just want to give that as an example of these are the backgrounds to many coastal situations around the world. But the challenge is how do we increase participation in learning across generations? Now, I have another short video which looks at how the educational response goes to those kinds of descriptions of the pollution and damage which happens in New Zealand. And again, I apologise if there is an echo here. I haven't quite figured out how to get this out of Zoom. But this is a very short video which shows some of those ideas which I've just introduced about environmental education and immersive education in action.
Lake NZ is our newest outreach program where we have 2 environmental educators going into schools across Auckland, talking about the difference between healthy and degraded environments. They're going to talk as a class and understand what causes our oceans to become damaged And then what would you do to prevent this? Working with New Zealand Geographic, we've produced a series of 360 videos taken from around Northland and around our Hauraki Gulf, showing what is beneath our surface. So what's on the about what you really like? As she's talked about through the VR program, we look at effects of pollution on the ocean as well as overfishing. And then at the end of our 1 hour session, we talk about actions students can do in their own homes or in their communities where they can make a difference for our ocean. What does the water look like? What's living on the rocks? What's swimming around you? These are all good ways to tell if it's a healthy or unhealthy environment. Alongside the VR program, we have a whole lot of teacher resources to work with the overfishing and the pollution topics, where the teachers can have a series of videos, activities, and presentations that will follow up our session. The best part of the job is seeing the reactions of the students when they're looking at the footage. From seeing the students getting excited about being surrounded by the world's largest stingrays, to then being underneath the wharf and seeing heaps of pollution, the water really, really murky, and seeing that direct change between the two environments. Virtual reality brings the ocean to the students in the classroom and immerses them in this marine environment.
Okay, with that example, and again, if you'd like to know more about it, do have a look at the link on my profile page to the website, whereas there's a case study looking at education, environmental education in the Blake, New Zealand situation. But what you will see when you look at that is that the program is also done with local Maori communities for intergenerational.
Humas ada untuk Humas ada yang PIC untuk Alan, boleh dikabarin? Prof Alan boleh dikabarin dulu tolong bahwa ada kesalahan teknis.
Recording in progress.
Hi everyone, can you
Hi.
hear me?
Yes, I'm terribly sorry for the inconvenience.
Sorry, I think you are on mute.
Okay, Professor Reed, you still have 10 minutes to continue your presentation. If you'd like to continue, you're free to share your screen again.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I have 10 minutes. All right, I'll get to
Yes.
the point.
All right.
Very quickly. Yeah, these things always happen, right?
I just check whether you want me to continue.
I think we are in theme 2, the second theme.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you see me?
Hello?
Yes.
David, we had a technical issue, so my presentation was stopped halfway through.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought the host was talking about my talk. Okay, yeah, you go first, Alan.
Okay, thank you. So, welcome back, everybody. I will just remind everybody that the slides are available on the site, and you can pick up on some of these things. Seeing I have 10 minutes, I will just try to edit what I was going to present as we go through. So, going back to some of the lessons that we can learn from the Blake New Zealand case study, I've mentioned some of the first things with the examples of what might happen with Maori community. But I think, again, for many marine and maritime educators, working out what are landmark destinations, particular bays, islands, conditions can be useful, but also how we could provide inclusive infrastructure, like having digital and immersive on land versions of those which people can use. And again, if we think about what is available in Indonesia as an example, you can quite simply compare what the National Maritime Museum in Jakarta offers as educational provision versus some of the other areas which provide more environmental education, education for sustainable development provision, like Taiwan's National Museum, which I visited quite recently and I found very engaging. But I don't have time to particularly go into that for now. So again, if we think about the SDGs now, what I just quickly want to identify here is that there are different ways of thinking about how the SDGs can connect. And in this particular instance, SDG 4 and SDG 14 are the key ones, but some of those black boxes there illustrate some of the other ones which were raised in the videos. SDG 14 picks up particularly about preventing and significantly reducing marine pollution of all kinds. And again, if we extend the question I asked on the last slide, it might be to ask what kinds of things the Maritime University, the only one in Indonesia, for example, should focus on, and what should be its contribution to this, and particularly when it comes to linking to SDG 4, what a faculty of teacher training and education can provide. So again, if we look at things like the education for sustainable development goals in a bit more detail, you'll see that in documents such as this from 2017, there was an encouragement to think about how the education for sustainable development goals might be put together. And they emphasise a particular model of education which focuses on competencies. So when we look at some of the things which come up with SDG 14, yes, we know that the SDG 14 focuses on conserving and sustainably using the oceans. But when it comes to competencies, what we're expecting educators in formal, informal and non-formal education sectors to work together on is developing students and other learners, adult learners as well, competencies in things like systems thinking, anticipatory thinking, strategic competencies, collaboration, problem solving and so on. And those are typically defined in terms of cognitive, social, emotional and behavioural learning objectives. Again, I'll quickly skip through some of the points here because I want to get to some examples of what those might look like. So again, the key methods, some of these were mentioned by Gil and they'll be mentioned throughout the day in the conference today, tomorrow and the next day. But things like collaborative real world projects, vision building exercises, analysis of complex systems and critical and reflective thinking are key to the kinds of things which will develop those competencies. Again, it's not teaching to a test, it's not delivering what's in a textbook, it's about thinking about the competencies that learners develop over time. So again, there are different principles which guide the kind of work which is done there. I will skip through this slide very quickly because I think we all know most of the ideas here. But again, if we see how this focus on education for sustainable development goals broadens out the discussion around education for sustainable development. We can also see here that this might be engaging learners, communities, and even governments with a change in mindset towards the ocean and towards marine pollution. So again, there are lots of resources by the likes of UNESCO which help illustrate that. So in the last few minutes, what I'd like to focus on is just some examples of what we might prioritise and what we might look at in terms of embedding the perspectives. And if you go back to that document, there are plenty of examples of the kinds of things, say in a school setting, you might see particular subject areas picking up on delivering on some of those cognitive learning objectives. And again, if we think about Indonesia, for example, Curriculum Merdeka is well placed to begin to address some of those things. The social and emotional learning objectives, again, there's plenty listed here, and P5 is a good example of that as a space to get us to think about what kind of character we need to develop, but also what drives us in terms of our moral purposes in education. And again, if we think about the behavioural learning objectives, these begin to get us to think about life worlds, livelihoods and lifestyles. Again, studies which look at how these are being embedded around the world do suggest that there's been little or no progress in quality education Goal 4 and life below water Goal 14 in the region. So again, some of the recommendations there might be to take a more place-based or thematic priority approach depending on where you are. So again, that's just a simple map of Indonesia there, but colour-coded against how different SDGs might be prioritised at different times. Again, there are different examples of learning topics that people might consider. The documentation is quite extensive, and you'll know many of these topics fulfil our curriculum objectives. Again, Bonnie, who is doing a PhD at Monash at the moment, he's been heavily involved in projects looking at some things like mangrove planting. And if you think back to those notions of what counts as an immersive education, physically you are being immersed, but also emotionally and psychologically engaging with a project which builds community and care and can make a difference in the real world in the long term. So again, as an effective form of immersive marine environmental education, that's a good example. The challenge, I guess, here is what do we imagine our citizens have a right to know? And again, not many governments are clear on this yet. And as the progress reports show, we still see many destructive trends happening in ocean health, which is, again, we need to think about the role of education here. So if we think about some of the targets and indicators which are available, you can see here with many of the ones which are listed on the SDG websites, there are questions that we could be asking and linking to other aspects of the SDGs. I'm just coming towards the end of my slides now. Again, you can have a look at these in more detail and perhaps ask questions about them after the other presentations. But I think one of the big challenges here is to look at where is their progress. And for the next few years, most of the SDG 14 targets were set for 2020. They were not achieved. There are updated ones for 2025. They are not on track. The ones for 2030 are unlikely to be addressed unless we transform, say, our education systems in the ways which I hinted at before. So, just to wrap up, a couple of quick key points here. I think it's important for us in this conference and as a ICOME community to think about how the Education for Sustainable Development Goals may move us beyond the remit of, say, 4.7 in the SDGs, and remind us that environmental education is key to achieving many of those Sustainable Development Goals, as in the models and examples I illustrated before, which have been doing this kind of work for 50 years. And then finally, thinking about how we build a community of maritime and marine education advocates. It could be alumni of the Maritime University, it could be the capstone projects in final years, it could be community-focused initiatives like the ones I mentioned in Bonnie, service learning, partnerships with various others. But having a strategy and a plan which embeds that and continues that over the long term is going to be crucial for transforming how, in a country with 17,000 islands, for example, Indonesia can take a lead on things like SDG 14. So to summarize, and again, if you want the slides, do have a look at the QR codes. But those were the three themes which I've introduced today, and I hope that those have been useful to you for discussion points. And I believe that I'll be coming back later on to answer any questions that you might have about those. But again, feel free to email me or contact me about any of the stuff that I've raised today. Thank you, moderator, and thank you for getting this back on task. It's quite an achievement, and I know how stressful it can be. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Reed, for the presentation. Question for Professor Reed can be saved until later. We would listen to other keynote speakers, and then after that we will open discussion and question and answer session for 3 of our keynote speakers for today. So if you have a questions, you can also write your answer, your questions in the chat box of our Zoom link. So participant, you may type in your questions to be later read by me for the presenters. Thank you very much, Professor Reed. Next, we continue to our 5th plenary session. I would like to welcome Dr. David Wei Tai, PhD, FHEA. Hello, Doctor.
Oh, hi. Hi, can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Yeah, let me...
Do I pronounce your name correctly, Dr.
Yeah,
Wei Tai?
yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, David Wei Tai. Yeah, that's me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very
Thank you.
nice.
Yeah.
I will be the moderator for today. My name is Pradipta, and I will assist you in today's keynote speaker session, plenary session. Before we start your presentation, I would like to introduce you to our participants, both in a Zoom meeting as well as in the room in our auditorium today. Okay, so our 5th plenary session we will have Dr. David Wei Tai, PhD, FHEA, Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. Currently, he is a lecturer in Professional Communication, University College London, and he is also teacher trainer in Intercultural Workplace Communication, Monash University, Australia. Also, he is an online teacher trainer in Professional Communication, Advantage Institute, Australia. He recently finished his PhD in 2022 in Applied Linguistics with specialism in Interactional Sociolinguistics, University of Melbourne, Australia, with the PhD thesis, Design and Validation of an L2 Chinese Interactional Competence Test, in which he received 2023 American Association for Applied Linguistics Dissertation Award. under the criteria of the award, originality of argument, analytic rigor, and broad impact on and implications for the field of applied linguistics as a whole. Today, we are very lucky to have Dr. Wei Tai here with us. We are very sorry for the delay. I hope we don't have any more difficulties later on. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Wei Tai for the presentation. You will have 40. Okay, you will have 40 minutes for the presentation. You may share the presentation now. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator, for the very generous introduction. And let me just get the slides up. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I am David Wei Tai. I'm joining you from London, Britain. So it's a bit early here, but I hope you all had a really good experience at the conference so far. So as the moderator mentioned earlier, my work involves professional communication in intercultural context, and my background is in linguistics or applied linguistics. So I have a natural interest in language and communication. So for the plenary today, my focus will be quite specific. I will be talking about maritime communication within this broader context of maritime education. So the question I would like to raise today for us is, when it comes to effective international maritime communication, what type of English or what kind of English accent more specifically should we aspire to? So we all know communication is vital to any form of professional work. And when it comes to maritime accidents, ICOME et al. 2012 identified that over 80% of the accidents were caused by human error. And without much surprise, a lot of the human error is hinged on communication. And they actually specifically pointed out that many of these errors include an element of competence or the lack of it in English. So we're already seeing perhaps some questions here, like why is English featured so greatly in maritime communication? And we'll get into this. So why are we focusing on on English per se? And if we look at some policy documents, for example, the Maritime Safety Community, they specify that when it comes to navigational purposes in maritime communication, there should be a common language that is used by people from different language backgrounds, and they specify that this language should be English. And a similar policy document by Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, they also stated that English shall be used on the bridge as the working language for bridge-to-bridge and bridge-to-shore safety communication, as well as for communications on board between the pilot and bridge watchkeeping personnel. So again, English is treated as almost this de facto language for maritime communication. And it is due to a range of factors, historically, economically. Ever since Second World War, English has become in a way, the dominant language, the international language that people tend to use when they come from different language or cultural backgrounds. It is the shared language that many people have learned, and somehow it has fallen into this de facto position for international communication. But this also raises an interesting question, because English in these cases is actually used as a lingua franca. So by lingua franca, what we mean is that it is a shared language used by people who often have different first language, or in a slightly old-fashioned term, like a native language. So it can be, for example, people who speak let's just say Vietnamese or Thai as their first language, but since they can't communicate with each other using Thai or Vietnamese because that's not the language they share. They just use English, which is a language both parties have learned. But the question, oh, sorry, just give me 1 second. Sorry. Yes, but the question here is, when we look at the population that speaks English, these statistics are already a bit old. In 2016, we have 1.5 billion people speaking English, and within them, 1.1 are actually speakers who don't speak English as their first language or native language. So they are the majority. Then it raises an interesting question. Is it still reasonable to use L1 English varieties as a benchmark for teaching, learning, and real-world practice? So the question is, when it comes to, for example, international maritime communication, which type of English should we aspire to? Is it, for example, American English accent, British English accent, or Vietnamese English accent or Thai English accent? So again, going back to maritime communication, we know that it takes place within the international shipping community. So it is very much made up of professionals coming from very different language and cultural backgrounds, and many of them might not be native speakers of English. And again, it is a lingua franca context. We often hear more than one variety of English, and we often have professionals speaking English with different accents, with different English accents. Some can be L1 or native English accents. Some can be, for example, like I said earlier, maybe they speak with Vietnamese or Thai or Spanish or Chinese English accents. And then this brings us to this very interesting question: which variety of English should we aspire to? So Desenayate 2017 argues that in the context of like maritime industry, when speakers don't always communicate with native speakers of English, and in cases of ship to ship, ship to shore, and onboard communications, it's a bit weird that, or it doesn't really make sense that we're teaching maritime professionals to speak like a native speaker of English, or if we're trying to enforce standards or certain features of L1 English or native English varieties, it doesn't really make sense because that is not the common English variety that is used in maritime industry. And also, it raises interesting questions about which accent is better, and I'm using double quotation marks here. So we have research, for example, by Uchida Takaki 2012, that accent comprehension difficulty is a major cause when it comes to miscommunication in maritime industry. But interestingly, they found that informants in their study actually rated Korean, Indonesian, and Thai seafarers' English much clearer than their British counterparts' English. So these participants somehow find non-native, non-L1 English accents much easier to comprehend than what we sometimes use as the learning objective or the gold standard of English accent or English variety, such as British English accent. And so it brings us to the question of comprehensibility. Are native speakers always more comprehensible than non-native speakers when it comes to English accent, when it comes to effective communication? Some related questions are, what about familiarity? Does that play a role if you're incomprehensibility? If you're more familiar with a particular type of English accent, does it make it more comprehensible? And what about attitude? If you somehow hold a certain English variety or English accent more favorably, how does that impact on your ability to comprehend it? So now we can turn to some research on non-native accents and listening. So previous research has identified a familiarity effect. So what they found is if you are more familiar with a particular type of accent, whether it's British English accent, Vietnamese, or Thai, then you tend to find it easier to understand people who speak with that accent. There's also this shared L1 effect. So what they mean by that is when you have people whose first language is matched with the first language of the speaker, then they tend to find the other person's speech much easier to comprehend. So for example, if you have a maritime professional whose first language is Thai, and then when they talk to another, for example, maritime professional whose first language is also Thai, and when they communicate in English, they will find it a lot easier to understand. They will find each other a lot easier to understand than, for example, when they speak English with someone whose first language is Vietnamese. And there's also this, in a way, finding of accent perception. So sometimes we hear people say, "Oh, I think British English accent is so beautiful. It's so nice. I really want to acquire that particular type of accent. I want to speak like someone who grew up in Britain." But this type of preference is actually learned. So Butler 2007 looked at the type of English accent or the English listening input that was given to English learners. And they noticed that when you expose, for example, a group of learners with, let's just say, American English accent, then they tend to find this accent more favorable. So this is the context, and I'm going to share with you a research study I conducted to unpack these interrelated questions when it comes to accent comprehension, and I will link it to the broader conversation we're having about maritime communication. So for the research project, I wanted to look at question 1, what is the difference in the performance of 4 L1 homogeneous adolescent student test taker groups on listening tests recorded in 4 different English accent versions? So what that means is I want to see when we give adolescent participants different English accents, do they perform differently in a listening test recorded in these accents when it comes to the ability to comprehend the different English accents. I also want to see, this is a related question, if there's an accent effect, does it impact performance differently on different listening tasks? The second research question is, what is the difference in how students perceive the 4 accents in terms of familiarity, comprehensibility, and attitude? Some of these are concepts that we discussed earlier when it comes to effectively communicating with other people and being able to understand other people. And the third research question is, what is the relationship between listening test results and test taker reports of familiarity, comprehensibility, and attitude? So I want to see the relationship between what we can actually measure in an experimental situation versus what people subjectively report about their degrees of familiarity, comprehensibility, and attitude towards certain accents. So these questions might seem a little bit vague here, but they will become a lot clearer, hopefully, as the talk goes on. And I'll just briefly share with you how I designed this study. So I recruited initially 253 15-year-old Chinese L1 students in China. So these are all adolescent students in China who speak Chinese as their first language or native language. And the rationale for looking at adolescent participants is that their perception of accent in a way is less biased by social learning or prejudice or certain favorable attitudes towards a particular variety of English. And these are, in a way, language users whose ideas haven't really been in a way, I guess, solidified. So it's interesting to see how they perceive the comprehensibility of different accents. So what I did then was I administered a preliminary listening test to recruit 80 of them who have similar proficiency in English. So the purpose of that is to make sure language proficiency or their control of English, their level of English doesn't impact on their perception or their comprehensibility of different English accents. So you can see I have 80 of them. I divided them into 4 different groups with minimal between group difference in terms of background variables such as language proficiency. Then I chose 4 English accents. We have Mandarin, Australian, Vietnamese, and Spanish. So Mandarin is the matched shared L1 accent with this group of participants. Australian is one of the native or L1 English accents. Then we have Vietnamese and Spanish, which English accents, which these students actually don't share. None of them speaks Vietnamese or Spanish. What I did then was I chose speakers for the 4 different versions of the test. I initially chose 12, and then I used the accent scale to select 1 speaker per accent. That is to make sure that the 4 selected speakers for Mandarin, Australian, Vietnamese, and Spanish are similar in accent strengths and identifiability. Again, this is for the purpose of standardization to make sure that any difference I observe in the results can be explained by the difference in accents, not by, for example, how strong a particular accent is or how easily identifiable a particular accent is. So then I developed an accent English test. So we don't need to worry about the specifics here, but basically what I did was I had the same language listening test recorded in 4 different accents. So the 4 accents I mentioned earlier, and I asked each of the 4 groups of students to take 1 version of the test. And you can see the test has 3 sections. I wanted the test takers to do picture recognition, to answer true or false judgment questions, and to complete gaps. And I removed some items that don't have very good reliability. And so I kept 21 of them. And you can look at the details later if you want. Apart from the language, the listening test, I also administered a subjective perception questionnaire to all the students, all 80 of them. The questionnaires asked them how familiar they found the accent in their particular version of the test, how comprehensible they found it, and what their attitude were towards that particular accent. So again, just to reiterate, 80 students, 4 groups, each group listened to 1 particular version of the same test. And when I say version, that means the test was recorded in a different accent. So 20 of the students listened to the Mandarin version of the same test, 20 listened to the Vietnamese, 20 listened to the Spanish, and 20 listened to the Australian. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the results. I'll be quite brief here, but if you have any questions about the statistics behind it, I'll be very happy to answer them later. So overall, we noticed that the students that took the Mandarin version scored much higher, significantly higher than the 3 other groups. So you can see this is mean of the scores. This is a standard deviation. Mandarin is much higher, and it is significantly different than the other versions. So what this says to us is, remember, these participants are adolescent students whose first language is Mandarin. So when their first language matches the speaker's first language, in this case Mandarin, so Mandarin to Mandarin, then they find the speaker's accent much easier to comprehend. And this is objectively measured and verified in this listening test. So it's not just how they feel, it actually shows in numbers. And there is a differential impact of task type. So when we look at picture, so for all 3 types of tasks, picture recognition, true or false, or gap completion, we can see students who took the Mandarin version always perform much better than the students who took other versions. But for example, there's some subtle differences. Let's just say for gap completion, this effect, this is much more significant than, for example, picture recognition and forced judgment. So what that means is when it comes to identifying and filling specific information, this shared L1 effect when it comes to accent is much stronger than other types of activities. And now let's move on to perception. So remember, I asked the test takers to complete a questionnaire about their perceived familiarity and attitude towards certain accents. So when it comes to familiarity, interestingly, the test takers actually found Spanish accent more familiar than Mandarin accent. And they also found Spanish accent more favorable than all the other accents, even more so than their own first language accent, which is Mandarin accent. And what about comprehensibility? Again, this is subjective judgment. They did find Mandarin accent more easily, more comprehensible, followed by Spanish, Vietnamese, and Australian. And this is significant. So that means this degree of differentiation is inferential. So that means it is not just a random result. If you do this again on a different day or to a different group of people, you're likely to find the same findings. So the results in a way are more reproducible. And I also just want to draw your attention to our native English accent or Australian English accent. So you can see test takers actually didn't find Australian accent more comprehensible. And if we just quickly go back to attitude and familiarity, Australian accent didn't really actually score quite low when it comes to test takers' attitude towards it. So many of these adolescent participants didn't really like Australian English accent, unfortunately, and they didn't find it very familiar either. And again, just quickly go back to this test results. So we can see Australian English accent also didn't score very high when it comes to objectively measurable criteria. So when people took the test, and if the test was recorded in Australian English accent, it's not as easily comprehensible as the Mandarin or Spanish version. So comprehensible. And finally, to answer research question 3, in order to look at the correlation or the kind of relationship between objectively measured test scores and subjectively measured perceptions, I did a correlation analysis, and I found that the test scores do correlate significantly and positively with all 3 measures on the questionnaire. So what that means is if the test, so in a way they verify each other. So if in the test a test taker found Mandarin English accent more comprehensible, they're likely to find it more comprehensible in their subjective assessment, and also more familiar, and they tend to hold a more favorable attitude if it is more comprehensible in the test. So what does that all mean in this broader conversation we're having today about maritime communication, maritime education? So this study that I did does support the in a way the existence of a shared L1 advantage. So what that means is if your first language is Thai and then you talk to someone whose first language is also Thai and you two talk in English, then you will definitely find the other person much easier to understand compared to you speaking in English with someone whose first language is Japanese or Korean. So this is the shared L1 advantage. And what does that mean when it comes to real-world communication? So sometimes we have people in language learning, language education who say, we need to only use certain accents to give students listening input, because if you include, for example, their native English accents, then you are disadvantaging other people. And you see this argument a lot in standardized international English language tests like IELTS and TOEFL. So far, they still limit their listening input to native or L1 English accents, such as British, American, Australian, New Zealand, Canada. I think that's all the accents they have in their listening sections. Their argument is when we include, for example, non-native accents such as Chinese or Vietnamese, then some groups of test takers will be unfairly advantaged because of this shared L1 effect. But in reality, if we expose language learners to different English accents, these subtle differences tend to just get evened out. And this is also the case, I would argue, in standardized listening tests, but it hasn't really been picked up so far. And we also notice this shared L1 effect impacts different tasks differently. So gap completion items are most susceptible to shared L1 effect. So what that means is if you need to capture specific concrete information, such as filling some gaps, grabbing some information, then this shared L1 effect will be much stronger. And interestingly, in this particular study, Mandarin accent, this is not so interesting, I guess this is kind of expected. Mandarin English accent is perceived as most comprehensible. So this supports this long line of research that evidences that when your accent matches, when your first language matches your interlocutor or your speakers or your listeners' accent, their first language, then you tend to find it more comprehensible. But what this study does find, which I think is quite interesting, is that Australian English accent, an L1 accent, and native English accent neither facilitated test takers' performance in the actual listening test, nor was it judged more comprehensible in our adolescent test takers' subjective questionnaire evaluation. So this, in a way, preference for native accents or for L1 English accents needs to be called in question. And we also noticed that familiarity is quite difficult to judge for non-native speakers. So remember, these adolescent L1 Chinese test takers, they actually rated Spanish and Vietnamese to a large extent more familiar than Mandarin or the Mandarin English accent, which is actually not true because they would have been exposed to Mandarin English accent a lot more than Vietnamese or Spanish English accents. And finally, there's no significant between group difference on test takers' attitude towards any of the accents. So that shows that when we don't tell people the nationality of the speakers they talk to, if they're not able to identify, for example, which accent it is, whether it's Australian or Vietnamese or American, then they don't have a significant preference to any of these accents. So that shows that sometimes when we hear people say, oh, I just love British English accent or American English accent or Australian English accent for whatever reason, these type of favorable attitudes is largely a result from social learning. So it can be how these languages are marketed, the socioeconomic power behind languages, the prestige people attach to different languages, or English varieties or English accents. But fundamentally, these favorable attitudes are not inherent. There's nothing inherently more better about a particular type of English variety, a particular type of English accent. We are, in a way, conditioned to believe some are better than others, again, double quotation marks. So again, implications for maritime communication. So English in maritime work is definitely a lingua franca, but do we really, going back to the question I raised at the beginning, the topic of this talk, do we really have an English variety or type of English accent that we should aspire to that is, in some way inherently better than others? My answer to that is no. So English is a language that we all use for professional purposes. Again, for whatever reason, historical reasons, it is what it is. It might change, but it is mostly what's happening right now. But it doesn't mean that native or L1 English varieties are necessarily better in any sense or in any measure, whether subjectively or objectively. We should take ownership of English and formulate realistic and also helpful learning goals when we try to learn English. So if English is a shared language, then why do we have to I guess sometimes you see some people spending years trying to sound like a British English speaker, British English I guess variety someone who speaks British English as their first language, but this is actually not that important.
Excuse me, Doctor.
Sorry.
Excuse me. You have 10 more minutes for the presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. I think I'll finish ahead of time a bit. And then we have this shared L1 accent effect. So we know that it can facilitate communication. And this is a very important message for different groups of stakeholders. So when we have people using English in lingua franca situations, sometimes when you expose people to different accents, they actually will find the ones that speak their L1 English, their L1 language much easier to comprehend. And accent preference, like I said earlier, is a social construct rather than a definite quality. So we can shape people's preference towards accents. And also, native or L1 English accents are not always most comprehensible, and this applies to maritime communication as well. Remember the study I cited earlier that people, maritime professionals in some specific contexts actually find Thai English or Filipino English a lot easier to understand than I think the one with British English accent. And finally, this points to the implication for pedagogy. We need to expose maritime communicators or learners of maritime communication or maritime English to a wide range of English accents. It cannot just be British or American English accents. What we need to do is to give them opportunity to familiarize themselves with different types of English accents, some L1 and some L2, so that when they go out into the real world, they don't have pre-established notions or biases towards certain English accents. And because English is used as a lingua franca in maritime communication, giving them opportunity to get used to different English accents is actually conducive to them doing a good job in their work. But we're still not really seeing a lot of that in maritime training. And if anything, some of the learning materials I looked at actually still show this in a way. There's definitely a privilege towards native English accents. So and if you have seen different teaching and learning materials, please do let me know later during discussion. I'll be very interested to take a look. But in a way, this preference for native English variety, native English accent is still quite deeply entrenched in our thinking of teaching and learning. Okay, so if you want to have a closer look at this study I did, you can have a browse. It's published. This is the QR code to that paper, and you can also easily find this paper in my public profile, like ResearchGate. And if you can't find it, just send me a message to my email. I'll be very happy to email it to you. Okay, thank you for your attention. So that's the end of my talk. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wei Tai, for the amazing presentation. In this way, I think I am on the same page as you, Doctor. Okay, thank you very much. I also welcome the participant in the online Zoom to leave your questions in the chat box. I will read your questions later on after we listen to our last presenters of the day. So, Dr. Oitai, we will have our discussion and question session after the last presenter presented his topic. Okay, so for the last presenter for today, we have Professor Yutaka Ukaji.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello. Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Okay. Very well. How are you, Professor Ukaji?
How are you? Can you hear me?
Okay. Hello, I will be the moderator for today's plenary session. My name is Pradipta. Before we start your presentation, I would like to introduce your curriculum vitae, a short curriculum vitae. So here we have Professor Yutaka Ukaji. He is a professor in Faculty of Chemistry, Institute of Science and Engineering, Kanazawa University. From 2005 until present. And then he received many awards, such as Tanabe Award in Synthetic Organic Chemistry, Japan, 1995, and then Progress Award in Synthetic Organic Chemistry, Japan, 1998, and Bulletin of the Chemical Society of Japan Award, December 2004 and December 2010. And his research interests are chemistry on organic synthesis, organometallic and organometallic chemistry. I think I would like to welcome Professor Ukaji. You will have 40 minutes for the presentation. Okay, the time is yours. You may share your PowerPoint.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. So, can you see my slide?
Not yet, Professor.
Yes. Okay. Let's. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay. So let's start my presentation. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Selamat siang.
Selamat siang.
Selamat siang. It's great honor for me to be invited to take part in this prestigious conference. And okay. Here is Tanjung Pinang in Indonesia. I'm in Kanazawa in Japan. Indonesia and Japan are surrounded by the sea, and in both countries, the natural science, especially maritime science, is very important for our social life. In both, and we can learn many things from the sea and develop the new area of the science and education related to the sea. I'm working on the chemistry, especially in organic chemistry. So today I'd like to talk about some aspects of organic chemistry for maritime science, and let me introduce some our research, innovation 1,3 dipole chemistry. This is an overview of today's talk. Firstly, general aspect of the chemistry in natural product science will be introduced, and I will talk some keywords of today's talk, monthly dipole, and I will show you our recent research. So let's move to the first part, the chemistry in natural. This is the rough flow of the chemistry in natural product science. Firstly, organisms that show interesting bioactivities are discovered, and objective bioactive compounds are isolated. After their structure are determined, the total synthesis is often carried out because such kind of bioactive compounds are obtained in very small amounts from nature. So total synthesis is the very useful method to solve the supply problem. During the synthesis, the elucidation of the mode of action is also performed. Finally, the novel drugs are developed by derivatization. Recently, environmentally benign synthesis is strongly required. In each step, the related academic fields such as analytical science, chemistry, physiology, medicine, pharmaceutical science are involved. And also the corresponding education, including environmental education, progresses. Let me show you the one example. Aspirin is the first clinically tested drug, and salicylic acid was extracted from the bark of willow tree. The end of the 19th century, a German chemical company, Bayer, developed aspirin via modification of the structure of salicylic acid by acetylation. And so far, more than 100 billion tablets are taken by people all over the world. From now, please forgive me to use the atomic symbol and some chemical equation in my presentation. As I mentioned, Indonesia and Japan are surrounded by the sea. Resources from the sea are valuable treasure, and in the case of Japan, the warm and cold currents around Japan make it possible to catch the various kind of fish. Furthermore, the resources marine organisms is very useful. Organism is a treasure trove of great variety of molecules bearing unique structure and significant bioactivities. For example, the puffy fish, Japanese name is fugu, contains the deadly toxic in their liver. However, the fugu is an exotic delicacy in Japanese cuisine. And
excuse me, Professor?
Yes?
The screen, the slide that we see right now is still the map between Kanazawa and Tanjung Pinang. Is that correct? Or have you changed the slide?
I changed, sorry.
Yes.
Right.
So what we
Thank
see
you very much
yeah.
to let me know.
Yep.
Sorry. Can you see some change? No.
It's still process of screen sharing, but
Let me try once more again, please. Yeah. No moving.
unfortunately we haven't seen your screen.
Okay, so give me some time to start again.
Yes.
Once I will
Okay. Committee, please check if Professor Ukaji needs help. Perhaps committee can ask to assist for the PowerPoint.
Recording in progress.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Professor, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? No.
Okay.
Excuse me. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can
Excuse me,
hear you.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Perhaps you can.
Yes, we can hear you, Prof. But I think the moderator
Sorry. Oh,
not unmute the Zoom.
please unmute committee. Tolong di unmute ini.
Can you hear?
Maybe the team has some trouble, Prof.
Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Prof. We can hear you.
Suaraku yang nggak bisa masuk. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. we can hear you, Professor. You may continue.
So I will try to connect to my PowerPoint. Okay.
Okay. Perhaps our okay. Nice. Okay.
Okay. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
And is it moving?
Yes, it's changed. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So let's start again. So okay. So in the case of sorry. In Japan, sorry. Warm and cold currents make it possible to get a variety kind of fish. And for example, this is the puffy fish, Japanese name fugu, which is very an exotic delicacy in Japanese cuisine, whose liver contains high concentration of the deadly toxin, tetrodotoxin. And Japanese Professor Hirata's group and several groups isolated and determined the structure of tetrodotoxin. And Japanese Professor Kishi firstly achieved the total synthesis of tetrodotoxin in 1972. This is the halichondrin, which was isolated from the marine sponge in the Pacific coast in Japan. And Professor Hirata group isolated and determined the structure of halichondrin bean. And Professor Kishi again firstly achieved the total synthesis of this compound in 1992. Recently, anti-cancer agent paraben, which is the simplified version and synthetically produced version of halichondrin B, was developed by and marketed by the Japanese company, a pharmaceutical company, Eisai. We are interested in the Manzacijin C, which was isolated from the Okinawan marine sponge by Professor Kobayashi. Toward the synthesis of the Manzacijin C, 1,3-diamine skeleton with quaternary carbon center is a challenging point. We imagine the utilizing the 1,3-dipole is useful to synthesis of this 1,3-diamine skeleton. So let me introduce the 1,3-dipole. 1,3-dipole is a useful chemical species containing 3 atoms with positive and negative charge at 1,3 position. Middle atom is usually nitrogen and oxygen. And 1,3-dipole readily promotes the cycle addition to produce the 5-membered heterocycles. Some chemical words I will introduce. That heteroatom means any atom other than the carbon or proton, hydrogen. And heterocycle means a ring structure containing atoms other than carbon. So 1,3-dipole contains at least one heteroatoms, and which produce the 5-membered heteroatoms at least contains one nitrogen or oxygen. And this 1,3-dipole cycle addition is classified as atom economical, a kind of environmentally benign reaction because all 5 atoms are involved in the product. One of the most simple and common 1,3 dipole is ozone, containing 3 oxygens. Ozone is very useful to protect life on the Earth from the dangerous sun UV, because ozone absorbs the dangerous UV from the sun. Recently, most popular 1,3 dipole is azide, containing 3 nitrogen atoms. Because Nobel Prize in Chemistry 2020 goes to these 3 professors for the development of click chemistry and bio-orthogonal chemistry. The Professor Sharpless introduced the click chemistry, which contains the 1,3 dipolar cycle addition of azide and various kinds of triple bond to produce these heterocycles. And by the addition of the copper triggered this cycle addition. It's like the click, so he named this reaction click reaction or click chemistry. Furthermore, the Professor Bartlett developed the cyclized alkyne, which are reactive enough to azide without addition of the copper. So click chemistry become now the less toxic. The copper is a little bit toxic, so without use the copper click reaction process, so this reaction can be applied to the bio-orthogonal chemistry. In addition to the ozone and azide, there are various kinds of 1,3 dipole, such as nitron contain carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, azimuthine, imine, carbon, nitrogen, and diazolalkane, different carbon, nitrogen, nitrogen, and nitrogen oxide, the triple bond version of the nitron, and so on. So let's move to the total synthesis of manzanite C. Before start the total synthesis of manzanite C, we need to solve another problem, the enantiomer selective synthesis. That is the selective synthesis of one of the 2 mirror images. Many organic compounds has the pair of the 2 mirror images. In the case of manzanite C, there are one pair of the manzanite C, the right-hand mirror image and the left-hand mirror image of manzanite C. And the natural manzanite C is the right-hand mirror image. So we need to synthesize the right-hand mirror image manzanite C selectively. In order to develop the enantiomer selective synthesis method, we use the tartaric acid as a chiral auxiliary. Tartaric acid is very famous in the textbook of organic chemistry. In 19th century, the French Pasteur is famous as the father of biotechnology, found the phenomena of chirality based on the observation of the crystal of the tartaric acid derivatives in the barrel of the wine making by the observation using microscope, and he separated mirror image of this crystal to 2 parts by tweezer. And there are several asymmetric reactions using the tartaric acid derivatives as a chiral auxiliary. And Professor Sharpless is a Nobel Prize of Chemistry in 2022. He firstly received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2001 by this development, the Katsuki-Sharpless epoxy station. He used, in this case, one titanium atom for one tartaric acid ester derivative. We have used a different strategy for the enantioselective reaction. If the reactant A and B are bound to two different metals of dialkoxide, the 5-5 fused rigid structure would be formed, and the reactant A and B are bound to two metals and well-oriented and activated, and subsequent reaction between A and B is anticipated to proceed. By this strategy, we designed the enantioselective reaction 1,3-dipole cycloaddition of the nitrile oxide. That is, when the allylic alcohol is treated with diethyl zinc, tartaric acid ester, diethyl zinc, hydroxymolyl chloride, nitrile oxide is generated, which coordinate to the zinc metal in the two zinc metal chiral environment, and the subsequent 1,3-dipole cycloaddition to this double bond proceed enantioselectively. Although the precise reaction mechanism was not clean yet, but we propose this transition state model that contains the nitrile oxide and two zinc metal chiral environment. From this state, transition state, the nitrile oxide attack to this double bond from upper phase to give this mirror image compound selectively. The addition from the lower part is not activated, and the reaction will not proceed. Actually, the reaction from the upper side proceeded almost completely 9 to 9 to 1. In this case, we say 99 minus 1 equals 98% EE. So we solved the enantioselective synthetic method. So we applied our strategy to the synthesis of manzanite C by a 1,3-dipole cycloaddition, as shown here. So let's keep. In this case, also, we found the use of the environmentally more friendly magnesium than zinc. The magnesium is more environmental friendly metal, so we can succeed to use the magnesium as a key metal component. And from this transition state, the azomethyl imine attack to this double bond from upper side to give this mirror image compound quite selectively, 97.5 to 2.5, equal the 95% E. So we can now synthesize this desired intermediate. So we next try to convert this compound to manzanite C. There are two points to convert this compound to manzanite. First part is the removal of this 3-atom moiety, and conversion. Second part is conversion this phenyl group to carboxyl acid. First, to long story short, anyway, to make long story short, this 3-atom part can be removed by hydrolysis of this part and the ring opening is achieved. And retro-Michael reaction is successful to remove this 3-atom unit to this compound. And the oxidation of the phenyl group to carboxylic acid was achieved by the use of ruthenium catalyzed oxidation. And several treatments afforded this compound in good chemical, good chemical yield. The conversion of this lactone to the minus C was already reported by the Professor Ofune, so we achieved formal total synthesis of manzanidine C. This is the summary of the formal total synthesis of manzanidine C. The 1,3-dipolar cycloaddition to produce the one mirror image of this compound, and this compound was readily converted this lactone. So formal total synthesis was achieved. This project was carried out of the one cute Vietnamese student. So let's move to the last part, the innovation of 1,3-dipolar chemistry. The 1,3-dipole readily promotes the 1,3-dipole cycloaddition, as I mentioned, but in addition, 1,3-dipole worked as the activated CN double bond imine compound in the case of nitrogen and azomethyl and which is subject to nucleophilic addition to produce various kinds of nitrogen compounds. As a nucleophile, we have been interested in carbene. Carbene is a molecule with 2 bonds and 2 valence electrons, which is works as 1,1 dipole. Furthermore, the sulfur atom and the nitrogen atom coordinate to the carbene. The similar carbene type species are also possible, which is named as the E-like. Classically, the 1,3-dipole and carbene are classified as a quite different chemical species. We imagined if the 1,3-dipole and carbene or carbene type species are mixed in the same flask, synergy effect is created to generate the various kind of chemical species, such as the 1,3-dipole plus 1,1 dipole means 1,4 dipole, and so on, in an environmentally friendly manner. These compounds are difficult to be produced in other methods. And firstly, we found that the 5+1 cycloaddition of azomethyl with isocyanate. When isocyanate is treated with the azomethyl the reaction proceeded quickly and cleanly without any Lewis acid catalyst to produce this 5+1 cycloadduct. The various kinds of azomethyl and isocyanate are applicable to this 5+1 cycloaddition. In this reaction, isocyanide attack to this carbon and followed by the ring closure by the intramolecular carbonyl oxygen to the nitronium intermediate to give this 5+1 cycloadduct. So we next turn our attention to the sulfur ylide, carbene type compound from the isocyanate. As a carbene type compound, we selected the sulfur ylide. Sulfur ylide was quite useful chemical reagent developed by Professor Corey. By this reagent, the carbonyl, the imine compounds are converted to the corresponding epoxide and azilizine. By the treatment of this sulfur ylide, in this case, sulfonium ylide as a sulfur ylide with the azomethine imine, the similar 5+1 cycloadduct was obtained. To our surprise, the ring expand 7-membered ring compound was mainly obtained. In this reaction, the ylide was attached to the azomethine imine. This intermediate would be formed. When the oxygen attacked to this carbon, the similar 5+1 product A was obtained. But in this case, nitrogen atom of azomethine imine attacked to this carbon to produce this 3-membered azilizine intermediate, and followed by the oxygen attack to this carbon, realize the ring bond cleavage and ring expansion to this to give this compound. After several examinations, by the use of relatively large sulfoxynium ion, the ring enlarged compounds were obtained in good chemical yields. In this case, this sulfur ylide realized the formal, not directly, a formal insertion of methylene group into the carbon nitrogen in the 1,3-dipole azomethine imine. So next we change the starting material to this alpha beta unsaturated nitrons, which contains the 1,3-dipole with conjugated double bond. In this case, the similar 5+1 adduct was not obtained, but methylene inserted this cycle compound was obtained selectively. In this case, sulfur ylide attacked to this carbon nitrogen bond of nitron, not the beta carbon of this part. And similarly, the azilizine intermediate would be formed. And Meisenhammer rearrangement realized the bond cleavage of this part to produce this compound. By the use of deuterated sulfur ylide, the methylene group was confirmed to be inserted this position. Although the chemical yield should be much more higher, the various kind of methylene inserted compounds could be synthesized as shown in this slide. In this case, from the reaction we can learn the methylene group was formally inserted to this carbon nitrogen bond of 1,3-dipole. Can I have some more time to talk?
Yes, Professor, you still have 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, let's skip this part. Okay, so next we turn our attention to the sulfur, from the sulfur ylide to nitrogen ylide. Nitrogen ylide has the different 1-1 dipole characteristics because the leaving ability of nitrogen bond is a little bit different from the sulfur group. So we try to examine the reaction with diazo compound to the azomethylamine. Firstly, we use the ethyl diazoacetate as the diaz compound, and in this case, the ring enlarged compound was not obtained, but ethyl diazoacetate was introduced into the alpha position. This reaction might proceed by a nucleophilic attack, not the nucleophilic attack to this carbon, but the protonation of acidic this hydrogen to produce this compound. So in order to promote this ring enlargement, we change the diazo compound from diazo ethyl acetate to the diazomethane, whose alpha proton is less acidic. In this case, we can observe the shift of the transformation to this ring enlargement compound. Although this compound was obtained in relatively good chemical yield, diazomethane is toxic and explosive, and if possible, it should not be used. So we try to use the trimethyl diazomethane, which is less toxic and less explosive, and this reagent is commercially available. So we found by the addition of methanol that similar transformation was achieved to give this compound relatively good chemical yield. So under the optimized conditions, we try the reaction of the two diazo compounds. In the case of ethyl diazoacetate, starting from these azomethylamines, this type of compound were obtained in good chemical yield. In the case of trimethylsilyl diazomethane, by the addition of methanol, the ring enlarged compound were obtained in good chemical yield, as shown in this slide. So this is the summary of today's my talk. Firstly, the formal total synthesis of methocene was achieved, and in this reaction, environmentally benign magnesium could be utilized for the enantioselective 1,3-dipole cycle addition. And the second part, the innovation of 1,3-dipole chemistry, the synergy with carbene types, we can develop the environmentally friendly reaction without metal. This project, the application to the synthesis of marine natural product was not achieved. So, for example, these ring enlarged compound are known as a marine alkaloid, and this compound is known as have some bioactivities. So in future we can apply our method to the synthesize marine alkaloid or some biologically active compounds. And I'd like to thank all members of our group. And this is a picture of our group in the spring under the tree of the cherry blossom, sakura tree. And before closing my talk, let me introduce some of our town Kanazawa. Here is this is Japan, and this is Tokyo and Osaka, which are located the Pacific Ocean side, and our city is located the other side, Sea of Japan side. In winter, the wind containing many moisture blows from west side, and we have a lot of snow this area. This is a picture of one day in winter. We have a lot of snow, but we can enjoy the many fish, seafood, crab, and sushi. And in spring, we enjoy the sakura watching, and we have many culture and some beautiful arts. And our university, in our university, more than 100 Indonesian students are studying. So if you have a chance to come to Japan, please visit our town Kanazawa and come to Kanazawa University. And thank you very much for your kind attention. And terima kasih banyak. Thank you.
Terima kasih, Professor Ukaji. Thank you very much for the presentation. Okay, now we enter discussion session. I would like to invite participants both in the room with me and also the participants in our Zoom room to give discussion or to give questions to one or all of our presenters today. For our first presenter, we have Professor Alan Reed with his presentation about environmental education, and then we have the second, we have Dr. David Weitai with the presentation of which English should be used in maritime context, and then we have Professor Yutaka Ukaji as the last presenter with the organic chemistry for maritime science. Okay, so is there any questions from the audience and from the participant in the Zoom room? Committee, can you please open the chat box? Perhaps there are questions from the participant. Okay, perhaps from the participant in the Zoom room, I invite you for questions or discussion session. Or the audience here, is there any questions from the audience? Okay, perhaps we would like to wait for a second, presenters. Perhaps our participant and the audience here are still formulating their questions. Okay, it seems that we have a question from Professor Gillian. Yes? Okay.
Thanks, Gillian. I can see your question in the chat.
Yeah, I think it's in the chat room, chat box. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the questions is for Professor Allen. Australia does not have a strong marine science component in the curriculum. Do you know of a country who is doing this well? Okay, I give time for Professor Reed to answer directly.
Thank you. It's an important question, and I think one of the things to be clear about is taking countries as a unit of analysis is probably going to confuse matters slightly. I think when Gil was doing her talk earlier and explaining about in Australia the costs of getting, say, students to go to the coast, there may be situations where you have a country like Australia where something like 80% of the population live within 50 kilometres of the coastline. So the actual geographical distribution of where the population is can affect the kind of marine science component in the curriculum. The people who live, dare I say, in the middle of Australia tend not to have very strong provision in marine science curriculum areas. So it tends to be the smaller countries which have a strong economic link to, say, the blue economy, where you do see strong marine science components. But again, it can be distorted in lots of different ways. Just to give a very quick example, in the marine science book that I mentioned at the start of my talk that Bill and her colleagues put together, in looking at things like ocean literacy, you'll see that some parts of, say, the USA on the west coast, the east coast, the Gulf Coast, have strong components at a state level, but particularly at a school board level. And then again, if you look at technical colleges and universities, again, it may be that where those provisions are in place. I'd really hope that with the Maritime University in Indonesia, that would be a good example of how you're going to have dedicated provision to particular areas. But I also suspect it means that across the rest of Indonesia, people expect the Maritime University to do this work so that they don't have to. And so you see a decline in the marine science components in other universities as a result. So again, at the end of my talk, one of the things which I wanted to emphasize was the role of the kind of educational networks, whether it's policymakers who can embed this across a range of sites, not just in special sites, will be important. So it's go back to the country who's doing this well, where they have particular curriculum provision, like a named course in this area, you see it. But if it's reduced to things like cross-curricular things, extracurricular provision, it's unlikely to be as strong as it might be elsewhere. So again, I can't give like a list of countries, but you'll find that looking at where people end up from marine science, if marine science is focused on things like energy exploration, fisheries quotas, etc. I come originally from the UK. You see, like in the place of some of my family up in Scotland, in Aberdeen, there is a strong marine science component to provision there, but it's more about science, technology, exploration, resource exploitation, not the kinds of sustainable development goals things I was mentioning earlier today. So again, just because there's provision, it doesn't necessarily automatically mean it's the right kind of provision to meet some of the challenges which I outlined in my talk. I hope that's a sufficient response to that question.
Thank you very much, Professor Reed, for the answer. Okay, so Professor Kidman had response. She thank you for your comprehensive response. Okay, now we move on to, we have questions from the audience here. Okay, please, we have Miss Hanifa from one of the audience over here. You may state your questions. Okay.
Hello. Okay. Good afternoon, all of the keynote speakers. In this occasion, I would like to ask questions to Mr. David related to listening skills. My questions: how the students, especially in university, how they can obtain the listening test with various L1 accents. Sometimes it is still a big problem for the students to obtain the listening test with various L1 accent. Thank you, Mr. David. I hope my question is quite clear.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Can I just clarify, were you asking how to help students develop listening skills to a variety of English accents or only to L1 English accents? Sorry, I didn't quite catch the last bit.
How the students obtain the listening test with various L1 accent.
Okay, sorry. Yes. So, very good question. I would say we need to think about English language education from the outset, right? Because when you look at listening materials in textbooks, they tend to only or predominantly feature native English accents. So like I said earlier, Australian, the American, British, Canadian, and New Zealand English accents. So, and language learners grow up listening only to these very specific L1 English accents. And can we have a rethink about what kind of listening materials we can feature in their textbooks or in the classroom, right? So if we, for example, try to make the materials more realistic and more authentic by representing how people actually talk in, let's just say, in the real world. If you, for example, travel to Australia, you will see people communicating English with all kinds of accents, and mostly and more often than not, they're actually non-native English accents. So why can't we feature that in the textbooks? And that would have a positive impact on assessment, because assessment in a way is a driving factor behind pedagogy, behind learning, right? So if in language tests like IELTS and TOEFL, we only see native English accents, that's creating this impression that these are the accents that students need to learn. These are the accents that language teachers need to teach in the classroom. So they kind of reflectively inform each other. So my answer to your question in a nutshell is a more holistic rethink of how we teach English listening, and by exposing students to different accents early on.
Okay, thank you,
Did I
Mr.
answer
David.
your question? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. David, for the answer.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for Dr. Wei Tai for the answers. And here in the chat box, we have 2 questions for Professor Ukaji. So there are 2 questions. The first question is from Miss Adriani. She asked, how does the composition of dissolved organic matter in seawater vary across different marine environments? And what are the implications for marine ecosystems? And then the second questions from Ms. Khoirunisa. To Professor Ukaji, thank you for your presentation. I am interested in the term atomic economy, as you said earlier. Can you provide an explanation with examples related to it? Thank you. So those are 2 questions from 2 participants.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. And to your first question, the organic material in the seawater is recently very how to say timely problem, because from the university laboratory or something, the all materials are collected and correctly treated, and basically the material does not go out to the sea. But at industry, for example, if we burn the how to say petroleum material, so some how to say small organic material go out from the industry to the air or water, seawater. So some of them flow to deep or far from the land. So now some of them are sometimes toxic. So it's not so serious problem now, but how to say, we some project checking how far or how much. So in future, it become much more clear. But we should, of course, we should not we should keep all material should be inside the how to say industry or something. But it's quite difficult to control completely. So, and of course, marine ecosynthesis should be achieved much more, but it's complete control is now a little bit difficult yet. And towards the second questions, the atom economical synthesis means how to say, for example, in my case, from 3 atoms with 2 atoms gave the 5 atoms compounds. It's basically atom economic. But usual reaction, some of how to say, for example, when some atoms connected to the reactant, some atoms will be removed. So if the removed atom, the contents of removed atom is so large, so it's not atom economical. So of course, towards the synthesis preparation of the, for example, in our case, 1,3 dipole, some other metal are required. So 1,3 dipole cycloaddition itself is atom economical, but for preparation, now we use the extra atoms. So it's some other problems. So completely atom economical reaction is how to say ideal. But So, including the preparation and the after treatment, the no loss of the atom is completely atom economical. But actually some, for example, preparation stage, we discard some atoms. So if we can reduce the atom discard, we can discard our reaction, our system become more atom economical. So it's ideal, or how to say, it's, if possible, it's good for the environmental problem, I think. But actually, it's a little bit difficult now. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for Professor Ukaji for the explanation. Here in the chat box, Ms. Adriani responded with, thank you for your explanation for Professor Ukaji, and from Ms. Khoirunisa also say thank you so much for the great explanation for Professor Ukaji. Okay, is there any questions both from the online participant and also the audience over here? Okay. Very well. I think that is the end of the discussion session. Therefore, there is also the end of our plenary session for today. I would like to thank all the presenters for today, Professor Alan Reed, Dr. David Wei Tai, and also Professor Yutaka Ukaji for the time and for the knowledge and for the inspiration you share for us today. It is hoped that it can be a new spirit for us to work on education in many sectors. Thank you very much. I would like to say sorry for the delay and also for the technicality problems that we face today. Again, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Please, Nancy.
Education also ended.
Saya Emma Aulia Zahro.
Dan saya Zidan Dwi Khalfani Karim. Pamit undur diri.
Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.